the shuttle descended quietly through the thin veil of Earth's clouds, its silver hull catching the light of the afternoon sun. To the people gathered on the ground, it must have looked like a falling star pausing mid-descent, shimmering against the blue sky. For Vela, seated stiffly inside the passenger cabin, it felt like crossing into a dream she was not prepared for. She had trained for years to be chosen. Among her people, the Chirelians, students who excelled in science and diplomacy were given rare opportunities to travel beyond their homeworld. But even in her wildest imaginings, she never thought she would be sent here, to Earth, the planet of the unpredictable species known as humans. The shuttle touched down on the campus lawn of the Interstellar Academy Exchange. Dozens of human students pressed against the security line, their eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. Some held little flags, some had cameras. They waved as the ramp lowered. Vela hesitated at the top of the ramp. Her body was tall and slender, with pale silver skin that shimmered faintly under the sunlight. Her dark eyes were large and luminous, adapted to her homeworld's dimmer skies. She wore the simple, formal robes of a Chirelian student, robes that suddenly felt too stiff, too alien as she stood in front of a crowd of laughing, cheering humans. She whispered to herself in her own tongue, steadying her nerves. Remember the lessons, observe, record, learn. The first thing she noticed about humans up close was their faces. So many emotions flickered across them like shifting constellations. Smiles, laughter, curiosity, awe. On Chirelia, people rarely showed such expression. To Vela, the sheer openness of human emotions felt like standing in a storm of color. Professor Hale, the human liaison, stepped forward with a broad grin. "Welcome, Vela of Chirelia. You are our honored guest. Today you begin your study among us." Vela inclined her head, copying the respectful bow she had practiced. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly. "I thank you for your welcome. I hope to understand you better." Her words drew polite applause from the crowd. But as she walked with the professor through the campus grounds, her thoughts churned. Understand them? She doubted that was possible. Already she could feel how different humans were. They brushed past each other with casual touches, laughing loudly, speaking in rapid voices. On Chirelia, physical closeness was rare and reserved for family bonds. Here, it seemed almost careless, but somehow warm. Later that evening, after the welcome ceremony, Vela found herself standing at the edge of a human common hall. Students gathered in groups, sharing food, playing music, telling jokes. The air was filled with sound and life. She watched silently, an outsider peering into a world that made little sense. One moment, two humans argued heatedly over a game. The next, they burst out laughing, slapping each other on the shoulders as if nothing had happened. How can they switch so quickly between conflict and joy, she wondered. A boy noticed she was standing apart. He had dark hair, a relaxed posture, and a calmness in his eyes that stood out from the noisy crowd. He smiled, not the broad, showy smile of the others, but something smaller, gentler. "You must be Vela," he said, approaching. "My name's Ethan. If you want, I can show you around tomorrow. This place can be overwhelming." His voice was warm, steady, without judgment. For a brief moment, Vela felt the storm of human expression soften. She gave the smallest nod. Yes, that would be acceptable. As Ethan returned to his group, Vela stood quietly, her heart unsettled. She had thought this exchange would be about facts, about learning and recording data for her people. But already, with only a few hours on Earth, she sensed something different. Humans were not just a subject to be studied. They were a force to be felt. and somewhere deep inside her, though she did not yet understand it, the first seed of change had been planted. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Academy's lecture hall, painting golden lines across the polished desks. Vela sat upright in the front row, hands folded neatly, her expression as calm as she could manage. Inside, however, her nerves hummed. This would be her first true lesson with human students. Not just greetings, not just ceremonies, but knowledge, the reason she was sent here. She told herself she was ready. She was Corellian. Precision, discipline, and reason guided her every step. Professor Hale entered, his arms filled with data slates. Today, he announced cheerfully, we'll cover the basics of human biology, reproduction, genetics, and the evolutionary quirks that make us what we are. A ripple of laughter and whispered jokes spread through the human students. Vela tilted her head in confusion. Why would reproduction be amusing? On Corellia, it was a serious, regulated topic. The professor dimmed the lights and displayed diagrams, the male and female reproductive systems, timelines of fertility, cycles of conception. Vela's large eyes narrowed, her mind processing each fact with sharp attention, until she reached a detail that made her freeze. Professor Hale spoke casually. Unlike many species, humans do not have a restricted mating season. Both men and women are capable of reproduction throughout the entire year. For a heartbeat, Vela thought she had misheard. She replayed the words in her head. All year? Her hand shot up before she could stop herself. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "That cannot be correct." The entire room turned to look at her. A few students chuckled under their breath. The professor raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Which part confuses you, Vela?" She straightened, speaking with careful precision. "Among my people, reproduction is possible only during the season of union. It is brief, 20 days every 12 years. The rest of the time, the body is closed. If your species is fertile at all times, then how do you maintain order? How do you avoid chaos?" The human students burst out laughing, though not cruelly. Some exchanged amused glances, whispering comments like, "She's serious," and "Imagine living like that." Vela's cheeks flushed a pale silver hue, the Corellian sign of embarrassment. She felt exposed, ridiculed. Before the professor could answer, a calm voice spoke from the back of the room. "It's true," said Ethan, leaning forward in his seat. His tone was steady, not mocking. "We're always fertile, but that doesn't mean we're always acting on it." The laughter quieted. Ethan continued, his eyes fixed on Vela. "Humans don't rely on seasons to guide us. We make choices. We build relationships, fall in love, raise families. What keeps us from chaos isn't biology. It's trust, responsibility, and sometimes sacrifice." Vela stared at him, unsettled. His words made little sense, yet something in his voice struck deep. She had always believed biology was destiny, that instincts controlled everything. To hear that humans lived by choice, by emotion, it was almost unthinkable. The professor smiled. "Well said, Ethan. That's the essence of humanity. Our biology gives us potential, but our hearts and minds decide how we use it." The lesson continued, but Vela barely heard the words. Her mind spun, replaying Ethan's explanation again and again. Trust, responsibility, love. On Corellia, there was no word that carried the same weight as love. They had terms for duty, for pairing, for reproduction, but none for this strange human force that seemed to bind people together beyond biology. When the lecture ended, students streamed out in groups, laughing and chatting. Vela lingered, still shaken. As she gathered her notes, Ethan passed by. He slowed just enough to catch her gaze. "I shocked myself, too," he admitted quietly, with a half-smile. "But maybe that's what makes us human." Then he was gone, leaving Vela staring after him. For the first time in her life, she felt something her lessons had never prepared her for. Not confusion, something deeper. A spark, a question that refused to fade. The lecture hall was quiet after class. Most students already gone. Vela remained seated, her notes spread neatly across the desk, though she wasn't reading them. Her mind burned with questions, her chest tight with unease. Ethan lingered near the doorway, backpack slung casually over his shoulder. He watched her for a moment before stepping closer. "You look troubled," he said gently. Vela lifted her gaze. Her dark eyes gleamed under the soft light. Troubled, yes. Confused? More than that. She hesitated, then gestured toward the diagram still glowing faintly on the display screen. "What your professor explained, it contradicts everything I was taught to believe about intelligent life. On Corellia, our biology shapes our society. We know our time to bond is short, so we prepare, we plan, we protect the line of families with strict order." Her voice sharpened. "If your kind is always fertile, then how do you keep from collapsing into chaos? Would not constant desire tear your society apart?" Ethan frowned, but not in anger. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. "It could, I suppose, but it doesn't, at least not most of the time. You're thinking of it like instinct is everything. For us, it's not. We've got something else, something stronger." Vela tilted her head. "Stronger than biology?" "Yes." Ethan's eyes met hers steadily. "Choice and love." The word love landed like a stone in Vela's chest. She had heard it before, in songs playing through the academy halls, in conversations whispered between human students, but she had never grasped its weight. She tried to mask her unease with cold reason. Love is only an idea, an emotion. Ideas are fragile. Emotions change. Ethan shook his head. "Maybe, but love also builds families that last a lifetime. It inspires people to sacrifice, to protect, even to fight wars. It's messy, yeah, and it can hurt, but it's also what makes life worth living." Vela scoffed softly, though her voice trembled. "You speak of it as if it were more powerful than instinct. On Corellia, instinct is law. When the season comes, we bond. When it ends, we return to order. There is no chaos of the heart." Ethan studied her for a long moment. His expression softened, as though he saw something behind her firm words. "Maybe that's the difference between us. For you, life is ordered by rules you didn't choose. For us, it's shaped by the risks we're willing to take." Vela felt her breath catch. She wanted to argue, to dismiss his point as naive human foolishness, but part of her couldn't. She remembered the way the students had laughed together, how arguments dissolved into smiles, how affection passed easily between them. It had felt chaotic, yes, but also alive. Her voice dropped, quiet, and almost vulnerable. "Do you not fear it, that such freedom could destroy you?" Ethan leaned back, his half-smile returning. "Of course we fear it. Love can break you, but we choose it anyway." Silence hung between them. Vela looked away, unsettled by the warmth that had crept into her chest. It wasn't logical. It wasn't safe. And yet, she found herself drawn to the strange certainty in Ethan's voice. Finally, she gathered her notes and stood. Her silver-toned skin shimmered faintly in the dim light. "You speak of things I cannot accept, but I cannot dismiss them either." Ethan stood too, his tone softer now. "Then maybe that's the start. You don't have to accept it yet. Just Watch. See how we live. You might be surprised." As he walked away, Vela remained still, her heart restless. For the first time in her carefully ordered life, logic alone could not steady her. In the quiet of the empty hall, she whispered to herself, "Humans risk everything for love, and they survive. But why?" The question clung to her as she stepped into the night air. It was no longer just curiosity. It was something deeper, something dangerous, something that felt like the beginning of change. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm for Vela. Classes, study sessions, long walks across the campus under Earth's open sky. Yet her thoughts rarely stayed on her lessons. More and more they strayed to the humans around her, their laughter, their arguments, their unguarded ways of living. She had begun watching them closely, not with the cold gaze of a scientist, but with something softer. One afternoon, she sat quietly at the edge of the courtyard, her journal resting on her lap. Human students sprawled across the grass, sharing food, teasing one another, reading aloud from books. The sound of their voices rose and fell like music. Her stylus hovered over the page. She wrote, "Humans appear restless, yet they comfort one another easily. Conflict does not seem to end bonds, but often strengthens them. They do not wait for seasons. They live as if every moment is fertile, not only in body, but in spirit." She paused, realizing her hand trembled. What was this stirring inside her chest, this unsteady warmth? She could not name it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion. Across the courtyard, a boy had stumbled during a game, his knee scraped and bleeding. The laughter fell silent. Before anyone else could move, Ethan was there, kneeling beside him, steadying his shoulder, speaking gently. "It's just a scrape. You'll be fine. Breathe." He tore a strip from his own sleeve without hesitation, wrapping it around the boy's leg. His voice never wavered, calm and reassuring. Within moments, the boy's panic faded, replaced by a shaky grin. The crowd clapped him on the back, grateful. Ethan simply shrugged, as though it were nothing at all. But Vela couldn't look away. The simplicity of it stunned her. The way Ethan gave without hesitation, the way he turned pain into safety with nothing more than presence. On Corellia, wounds would be treated clinically, without emotion, efficiency, not comfort. Yet here, the comfort seemed as important as the healing. Her hand moved across the page again. She wrote, "Humans sacrifice pieces of themselves for each other without calculation. They call this kindness, or perhaps love." Later that evening, she found herself walking beside Ethan, their steps echoing softly on the stone path that wound through the campus gardens. The air was cool, scented faintly with blossoms that only bloomed at night. "You looked concerned today," Ethan said gently, glancing at her. Vela hesitated. "I was observing." He chuckled softly. "You don't just observe, you feel. I saw your face when I helped that kid." She stiffened. "I do not—" She stopped, realizing the lie in her words. Her voice softened. "Perhaps I did feel something, but it was confusing, unsteady. My people are not taught to carry such things." Ethan slowed his pace, watching her with quiet intensity. Maybe that's the point of being here, to see what it's like, to learn that some things don't have to be controlled. His words unsettled her more than she wished to admit. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. She found herself acutely aware of the closeness of his footsteps, the warmth of his presence beside her. When they reached the dormitory steps, Ethan paused. "You don't have to understand it all at once. Just let yourself feel it." He gave her that small, steady smile again before disappearing inside. Vila stood alone in the quiet night. Her chest felt tight, but not unpleasantly so. She placed her hand over her heart, startled by how strongly it beat. Her journal waited upstairs, but for once she did not rush to record the observation. This was not data. This was something else, something alive inside her. She whispered to herself, the words foreign yet undeniable. Perhaps fertility is not only of the body, but of the heart. The weeks passed quickly. Vela's journal filled with careful notes, but more and more her entries drifted from sterile observation into personal reflection. Words like trust, kindness, longing began to appear between diagrams of human anatomy. She no longer looked at Earth only as a study subject. She was beginning to feel part of it. But peace, she soon discovered, was fragile. The news came suddenly one morning. The academy halls buzzed with tension as a broadcast flickered across every screen. A heated argument between human leaders and alien delegates had erupted. Trade negotiations, cultural disagreements, fear of contamination. It was difficult for Vela to follow every detail. What she understood was simple. The exchange program might be shut down. She sat in her dormitory, staring at the transmission. On the screen, her own people's representatives spoke firmly of returning their students home. Prolonged exposure to human unpredictability is destabilizing, one declared. We will not risk our youth being drawn into their chaos. Her hands clenched around the edge of the desk. Was she one of those youth being spoken of? Was her growing attachment to this place seen as a weakness? That evening, she walked alone across the campus garden. The air was heavy with unease. Even the human students were quieter than usual. She found Ethan waiting by the fountain, his expression shadowed. "You heard the broadcast," he said. Vela nodded. "They want me to leave." He looked away, jaw tight. "Do you want to?" The question struck harder than she expected. Did she? Only weeks ago she would have longed for the order of Kyrelia, the comfort of rules and structure. But now the thought of leaving made her chest ache. "My people believe your ways are reckless," she admitted. "They think your freedom will consume you." She hesitated, then added softly, "Sometimes I fear they may be right." Ethan turned toward her, eyes searching hers. "And what do you believe?" Vela struggled to answer. She thought of the laughter in the courtyard, the warmth of Ethan's smile, the quiet pulse in her chest when she stood beside him. These things were real, yet so was her duty to her people. "I do not know," she whispered. Ethan's voice dropped, quieter now, almost vulnerable. "I don't want you to go." Her heart tightened. For a moment she could not breathe. No one on Kyrelia would ever speak such words so openly. Desire, attachment, longing, these were contained, regulated. But here, Ethan bared his feelings without shame. "Why?" she asked, barely more than a whisper. He looked at her as though the answer was simple. "Because I care about you. More than I should, maybe. But it's the truth." Her silver-toned skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into logic, but she could not. His words struck deep, awakening the very emotions she had been trying to deny. Before she could respond, alarms rang across the campus. Red lights flashed along the pathways, and the intercom boomed. "Attention! Structural failure detected in the research dome. All students evacuate immediately." Ethan grabbed her hand without hesitation. "Come on." Vela stumbled after him, heart pounding, not only from the fear of the emergency, but from the sudden realization of how tightly he held her, how instinctively she trusted him. The night filled with shouts, rushing footsteps, and the echo of alarms. Vela's mind spun, caught between duty and desire, fear and longing. But one thing was clear. The fragile peace of her exchange was ending. The world around her was cracking open, and inside her chest, something even more dangerous was beginning to break free. The alarm screamed across the campus as students poured out of the buildings in frightened waves. Red lights pulsed against the night sky, illuminating terrified faces. Vela clutched Ethan's hand as he pulled her through the crowd toward the evacuation point. "The research dome! It's collapsing!" someone shouted. Vela's heart raced. The dome was vast, a glass and metal structure that housed delicate experiments. If it failed, shards of steel and pressure systems could tear through everything around it. But before they could reach safety, a deafening crack split the air. A section of the dome gave way, crashing down in a storm of glass and twisted metal. The ground shuddered beneath their feet. "Run!" Ethan cried, pulling her sideways. Too late. A support beam collapsed in front of them, sealing the corridor. Smoke and dust filled the air, choking them. The path to the others was cut off. Vela coughed, clutching her chest. "We are trapped!" Ethan glanced around quickly, his jaw set. "There has to be another way out. Come on." They pushed deeper into the damaged dome, stepping carefully over broken panels and fallen debris. Sparks hissed from shattered lights, casting eerie shadows. Every sound echoed like a threat. For the first time in her life, Vela felt real danger pressing close. On Corellia, life was ordered and controlled. Here, survival was uncertain, raw. Her voice trembled. "If the structure collapses fully, we will not escape." He paused, turning to her. Despite the dust streaking his face, his eyes were steady, calm. "Then we don't stop moving. I'll get you out of here, I promise." The certainty in his tone shook her more than the danger itself. Why should he promise such a thing? Why should he risk himself for her? Yet she felt a strange strength in his words, as though his belief alone could hold the dome up. They pressed on, the air growing heavier. In one chamber, a shattered tank hissed, releasing toxic fumes. Ethan tore off his jacket, pressing it into Vela's hands. "Cover your mouth with this. Don't argue." She obeyed, startled by the harshness in his voice. His breathing grew ragged without the protection, but he pushed forward anyway, guiding her past the danger. When at last they stumbled into a pocket of clearer air, she grabbed his arm. "You endangered yourself for me." He managed a weak grin. "That's what people do when they care." Her chest tightened painfully. This was no theory, no lecture. This was human love in its rawest form, sacrifice, freely given. The ground groaned above them, metal twisted, beams cracking under the strain. A large piece of framework crashed down, barely missing them. Dust rained over their heads. Ethan grabbed her shoulders. "Listen, if something happens—" "Do not say it," she cut in sharply, fear tightening her voice. "Do not speak of death." He searched her eyes, his expression fierce. "Then promise me you'll keep moving, no matter what." Her throat closed. For a heartbeat, she could not speak. Then, softly, "I promise, but only if you do the same." For a moment the chaos faded around them. They stood in the half-light of the ruined dome, bound not by orders or logic, but by something deeper, something Vela could finally feel, even if she could not name it. Another crash jolted them. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "Come on, we'll survive this, together."
And for the first time, Vela believed him, not because it was logical, but because her heart demanded it. They pressed forward into the darkness, two fragile figures against the ruin of steel and glass, carrying between them the flickering flame of something stronger than fear.
Hours seemed to pass inside the collapsing dome, though in truth it was only minutes before the rescue teams broke through. Blinding lights cut through the dust, and voices shouted their names. Strong hands pulled beams away, guiding them out into the cool night air. Vela stumbled onto the grass, coughing, her robes torn, her skin streaked with grime. Around her, students and staff rushed to and fro, tending to the injured. Emergency drones buzzed overhead, scanning for structural weaknesses. She should have felt relief. She was alive. She was safe. But when she turned and saw Ethan, bloodied, his sleeve ripped, his breathing shallow, something inside her broke. She rushed to him. "You are hurt." He shook his head, forcing a weak smile. "Nothing serious, just scratches." Her hands trembled as she touched his arm, verifying for herself. "You risked yourself again, foolish human." "Foolish?" His grin widened faintly, even through exhaustion. "Maybe, but worth it." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the chaos of the rescue fading into silence around them. Vela's heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with something far more dangerous. That night, after the chaos had settled and the injured were cared for, Vela found herself unable to sleep. She wandered outside, the moonlight painting silver over the campus lawns. Her thoughts whirled like restless winds, her people's warning voices, her own duty, and Ethan's face when he promised to protect her. She didn't notice him until he stepped into view. Ethan, moving slowly from his injuries, approached with that same steady gaze she had come to know. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "My mind is unsettled." They walked together in silence until at last they stopped near the fountain, where the water glimmered in the moonlight. Vela turned to him, her voice low and trembling. "Why do you do it? Why risk yourself for me, for anyone?" Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Because I care about you, Vela, more than I can hide anymore." Her breath caught. She stared at him, stunned, her chest tightening painfully. "Care? You mean?" "Yes." He stepped closer, his voice raw and unguarded. "I love you." The words struck harder than any beam of falling steel. They were simple, yet they shattered every defense she had built around her heart. Her voice wavered. "You say it as if it is easy." "It isn't," Ethan admitted, his eyes shining with emotion. "It's terrifying, but it's real. I've never felt this way about anyone before, and if I had to go through that dome again, I would, just to be with you." Vela's hands trembled as she pressed them against her chest. Her people had no word for this, no space in their hearts for such reckless surrender. Yet here it was, blooming inside her, undeniable. Tears glimmered in her luminous eyes. "Ethan, I do not fully understand what love is, but when you are near, I feel alive. When you are gone, I ache. And when you were hurt, I thought my heart would stop." He reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers. "That's love, Vela. Maybe it feels new, maybe it's frightening, but it's love." She allowed a trembling breath, her hand tightening in his. "Then, I too love you." The words felt strange, forbidden, yet right, as if speaking them opened a door inside her soul she hadn't known existed.
They stood there in the quiet moonlight, two worlds colliding, two hearts beating as one. Around them, the night remained uncertain, the future fragile. But in that moment, Vela understood something she never had before. Love was not bound by seasons. It was
The dawn
boundless,
after the collapse was quiet, almost too quiet.
eternal.
The research dome lay in ruins, cordoned off by rescue crews and engineers. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and dust. But across the campus lawns, students walked together in hushed voices, shaken yet grateful. They were alive. Vela sat on the stone steps of the academy library, her journal resting in her lap. She had opened it several times, but could not bring herself to write. Her words, once neat and clinical, now felt inadequate. How could she capture what she had seen in the dome, what she had felt with Ethan under the shadow of death? Her communicator buzzed with messages from her homeworld, directives, urgings, warnings. The Chirelian Council wanted her on the next shuttle. The humans are unstable, they had declared. You must not lose yourself among them. She stared at the messages until her hands trembled. Lose herself? No. She had found something here she hadn't even known she was missing. Vela. She looked up. Ethan stood at the bottom of the steps, a faint limp in his walk, his arm wrapped in fresh bandages. His smile was tired, but his eyes were steady as ever. They're saying the exchange might be canceled, he said quietly. Some people want to shut it all down after what happened. Her chest tightened. If they end it, I will be sent home. And if you go? His voice was calm, but she could hear the ache beneath it. She lowered her gaze. If I go, I leave behind the one thing my people never told me existed, the thing that makes all your chaos make sense. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. Then don't go. Her breath caught. The choice lay before her like a chasm, duty to her people or faith in her heart. For a long moment, she could not move. Then, slowly, she closed her communicator and set it aside. I will stay. At least, as long as I am allowed. Relief softened Ethan's face, and for the first time since the collapse, she felt the heavy knot inside her ease. Later that day, the academy held a gathering. Humans and aliens stood together, voices raised not in argument, but in unity. Vela and Ethan told the story of the collapse, how cooperation and sacrifice had carried them through. Others listened in silence, and for a moment, fear gave way to hope. When the meeting ended, Vela and Ethan stood under the open sky. The sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and rose. She opened her journal at last, writing carefully, I came to study human biology. I discovered something greater. Humans are fertile in body, yes, but more so in spirit. They can love without season, without boundary. It is reckless, frightening, and yet beautiful. I thought it was their weakness. I see now it is their strength. She closed the journal and looked at Ethan. His hand found hers easily, as though it belonged there. On Chirelia, we wait 12 years for the chance to feel what I feel now. Here, with you, every moment is alive. Every breath is fertile. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his smile quiet and sure. Then stay. Let's see where this takes us. The future remained uncertain. Politics could shift, her people could demand her return, dangers could rise again. But Vela no longer feared uncertainty, for she had learned the truth of humanity. Love was not a season, it was a choice, a flame that could burn in the darkest ruins, a bond that survived collapse and fear. And as long as she carried it, she knew she would never be lost.